Prof. Dennis Conrad, thank you again. And thanks so much for agreeing to be interviewed by the Early Career Researcher Hub. I think for us, it's just a pleasure to be able to hear from you and to harness your wisdom for us as a community of early researchers. So before we get too far into things, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about what you're currently engaged with, the kinds of work you're currently engaged with. If you're currently employed, I know the answer to that one, and what your main roles are.
Well, I am not currently employed, as you indicated in you, and I am involved in working with two doctoral students, and I am also working on a new publication. Well, two new publications I'm actually about to commit myself to. Well, I've actually committed myself already. One is the Caribbean Discourse in Inclusive Education, which was a publication I did with Dr. Stacy Blackman from Kayville. But then we shifted our lens, and the publisher is now pushing the idea, please, 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 please. So I'm meeting in next week. I'll be going to Barbados, actually not next week, Saturday, to finalize that. And there's also another publication I am doing looking at equitable education. That will be a more international thing I'm doing with another colleague at Hartford and at Randolph-Macon.
Excellent. So I'm hearing already that collaboration, regional, international collaboration, sounds like it's very much a part of what you like to do.
I believe in collaboration. I believe that if we have too much talk and we don't really build people, which is an important part of the collaborative process, as well as the reduction of unnecessary stress. Should you be wise enough to or fortunate enough to have collaborative partners who are really invested, you know.
And so, in your journey as a researcher, could you just share with our community a little bit about where else you've worked, what other settings you've worked over time? I know you've had a long and distinguished career.
Okay.
I know you've had some time at SUNY.
Yeah, well, before SUNY, well, the last would have been Minister of Education as the manager of student support services. And prior to that, I was with SUNY, the SUNY system. And I've been there for like 20 years. Prior to that, I was at Virginia Tech, where I would have done a stint for a year at the Virginia Baptist a residential home, which included a school. So I was the assistant director there. And then before that, I would have been back to Trinidad, where I would have been a principal at Wharton Patrick. Wharton Patrick is a special school. At that time, that was primarily for students with emotional conduct disorders or emotional behavioral difficulties. Prior to my experiences at of principal and special education teacher, which we choose to call officer at the time, I would have been at Piccadilly Government School. And then prior to that, I would have been at Mosika. Prior to that, I would have been at I had a traumatic stint at Rosary, Barataria Boys, now called St. Dominic's, and Nelson Street Boys, as I was trying to determine if I really wanted to get into this teaching thing, which I hadn't planned to do. So I was fortunate enough to be given an opportunity to have 2 semesters or 2 terms in each of these places to determine if I wanted to continue. So I was very blessed with that.
So what on that journey made you decide to continue along the route of education? Or was it Just one thing?
I think it was a Mosaic experience because while I was there, I actually got, I'm a Southward, right? So I came up from San Fernando, and because my mom and dad had separated, and I was looking for my mom, found my mom. She was living in San Juan at the time, and my grandparents were devout Catholics. And of course, the first thing is I had to find a CYO group, Catholic Youth Organization group. And I went to the one on San Juan there, where I actually met Lancaster Brown.
Right.
And
he was at what
yes. Yeah. We have a very interesting story. Right. So I met him there. It's well known that we didn't like each other. But while I was there, the priest there suggested that if I would consider teaching. I said, no, I wouldn't consider teaching. I had a clear pathway. And then he gave me an interesting piece of advice. He told me, well, before you say no, the next time I ask you, why don't you go and meet with Mr. Akal? Mr. Akal was living not too far from me, and he was the principal of the Presbyterian school in San Juan, which I always find a special story that the Catholic priest would tell me to go to speak to the principal. Mm-hmm. And I went to speak with him, and I have to say, almost radicalized me. Told me, teaching is not passive, and it's not about just doing kids work with kids. It is revolution. And at that time, it was just around the 1970s, and I was quite interested in the Black Power movement at the time. And the word revolution appealed to me, since I was also at a time interested in the Jesuit order, particularly in what was called at that time liberation theology. And his style of speaking was like whether it's the Presbyterian Church or the Catholic Church, that we are on the same mission. So I didn't get this sense of one or the other. Yeah. And that's what it started. And then the one piece of advice was, why don't I have some short stints? And then during that time, there was this newspaper. People were talking about advertisement newspaper, writing students. They were young teachers. They were interested in going to Musical Teachers College. Right. And somebody told me, I think it was the principal at Nelson Street, I think at the time, she was a school supervisor who visited the school, a very tall, very thin lady. Right. She was, I think, in netball. And she said, you can't go wrong with teaching. You could always leave and go into many other career paths. It's the best thing you can do. And I went in there, which was a community. And that kind of made me see things different, that sense of community of learners at the time. So that's what put me into teaching.
Excellent story. The comment that teaching is revolution makes me think of something Bell Hooks said. Mm-hmm. Teaching as an act of resistance. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
All right. So
prayer
yes.
Hooks and
so you mentioned already your publications with Stacey Blackman and as well some forthcoming works in equitable education. Share a little bit with us about other areas in which you may have published or other types of publications you may have worked on in the past.
Well, beyond my books, I have my research path actually is my research path. My interest, there's a difference between my formal research path and my research path. So let's just say my formal research path would have been when I did my master's. And I did a master's in conduct disorders and a research into the development of what at that time was what I consider to be effective education curriculum. And the idea was to use the regular school system as a means of developing a proactive, positive approach to, instead of behavior management, having what would be creating positive school and classroom climates. So the idea is you create, I'm getting too much into it, but basically it started as part of my master's. But I have to say this even doesn't fit in well. My first real love for research started when I was at Wharton Patrick. I had come back with my first degree from University of London, and Mrs. Patrick or Ms. B, one of them challenged me in how I was seeking to teach um, um, uh, uh, color, because I can't remember the detail. I think it was particularly based on the review of some particular model they had, and I didn't use that model. I was using a more effective model. And she said, well, if you want to do that, you have to find out about action-based research. You'll have to show me that it works. Anyway, so when I went to Sheffield, I did that. I did, and so for my PhD, I started to shift from conduct sociology because my let's say my research identity, my research persona, I started looking at the issues surrounding effective education, as opposed to what I was doing before, which focused more on behavior or pedagogy. So I started looking at at that time I was more interested in the dynamic of leadership. And when I looked at my life, there were people who were very powerful in my life, and most of them were women. And so I decided I wanted to look at leadership as it applies to women. What makes women more effective in my bias and in my perspective? What makes them more or less, let's be objective. And from my PhD work, of course, many times you are driven by your context. So I had planned to come to Trinidad, return to Trinidad. I was very much involved in educational leadership at the time through the tutor and the Sheffield program. And I had a rough time for a while, because while I wanted to do leadership and women were very instrumental in my evolution, I was also going through the opposite. There were women who I was nonplussed. And it's an ongoing journey, by the way. But the idea that I would want to, but you realize that it's also the individual. There's no nice fix. Women are. Some women are. Some women could also be very anti what one would consider good leadership. So when I got my job, unfortunately, because of a series of events, I was given the opportunity to work in New York, in the States. And my professor was able to recommend SUNY, and I was successful in two of the three I applied to, and I chose one. And I got there, and then there was the necessity, what they consider their research priorities. Because one of the challenges was that I was, and I only found out this afterwards, I was in it's called a teaching university. And I had to weigh a lot of things. My wife, she was also a student, and I was ahead of her. So I asked the ministry, I had asked the ministry to return to Trinidad. No, I had asked the ministry for an extension for 1 year since she was there, and she was pregnant. And the ministry denied it. And I was shocked, because I saw myself as someone who was well known, and it shouldn't be a question. I was shocked. Of course, afterwards I found out it's because I followed the appropriate channels. There were ways I could have avoided it, but I didn't know. So I got frustrated and said, you know what, if that is only attitude, I'll just take the job. So I took the job and I went to the 1 year. And there were a number of issues that centered there. There were question of effectiveness of special education. There was concern about, there was talk at this time about online teaching and learning. And so in many ways, my work was driven by the realities there, as well as balancing it with what my interests were. And I started to see special education as bigger than pedagogy and students with disabilities. I started to see the implications of gifted and talented, of persons who because of ineffective teaching, their educational needs become special. Sometimes it is because of socioeconomics. I started seeing it bigger than the question. Even the whole thing about behavior, I started to realize that I started to see a more sociological perspective that often we create these problems in society and then we blame the victims. So my research navigated through there, and then I started coming over notions, for example, of culturally responsive pedagogy. I started realizing, well, we have to engage learners. So then it pulled me into, I did some work with Rhapso as pedagogy. I did some work with Calypso as pedagogy. I started using texts like Salt, Loveless, or Samuel Selvon in my teaching on campus. And I think around that time, only in that I was also I was appointed as director of Africana Studies, which is something I wasn't ready for. But that also broadened my understanding of multicultural education. So then I shifted from the broader notions of special education to the question of diversity studies. So, and diversity studies brought you into the question of inclusivity. It brings you into the question of social justice. It brings you to the notion of transformational leadership, and it takes you on its own journey. And because of that, I was able to work with people across campuses or across different disciplines. And I've always maintained one of the best advice that Lancet ever gave me was, he told me, the danger of a teaching university is that you don't need to really do much research. However, then your career path is shaped by just, yeah, right. So I spoke with my provost, and as I took Lancet's advice, and I doubled the expectation. I tripled the expectation. As a matter of fact, I was one of those persons who got my full professorship quite quickly based on the system. And I'm grateful that part of this strategy that helped me was my willingness to be collaborative and my willingness to build capacity, because it's the right thing to do. You know, you just don't take from people, you build people. As Mr. Pilgrim, a former school supervisor in special education many years ago, as he told me, because in the end, you're only on the throne for a little while, 2 years, 5 years, you know, and then you come off the throne, and the people who were your followers, they are the ones who want to take over. So it's important to prepare them rather than just push them around. So these things influence me a lot. And that's it basically in terms of the evolution. If I had my seat in front of me, I would have been better because I would have been able to see the things that I have.
To be fair, I think what we've heard is quite a compelling story of a journey over time with your interests evolving and then refocusing. It sounds like you had those early interests in equitable education, or you know,
I always tell to the shock of many of my guests in audiences, I come from Kachas. I know Kachas, and I also know in my family, you know, some of us have had that privilege growing up where you have the Kachas, but you also have family who are successful. So you have this, you're living between two worlds.
Yeah.
So one of this stuff, so for me, I couldn't understand. I had this aunt, as opposed to tanty, you know, I had an auntie that was my tanty, and then I had an auntie, right? Yes. And by auntie is where she would check on my enunciation, check on my knife and fork, check on how I could, whether I tie my tie. And it was positive. The only mystery I had is why they have a whole room for piano. I couldn't understand. What is so special about the piano? No, 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 no. You'll have to go to music school. That's what because up to now, I love music, but I can't play anything. I have a band for years now trying to play Sera Sera. But you know, that history when someone could sit down and wow, you know? So it's interesting, the story.
Yeah, I think, well, for me, certainly hearing about your strategy, I think is where we'd like to go next. When you talked about your strategy in navigating through the academia and achieving the goals that you had set yourself, deliberately so. How would you say, what would you say is your researcher identity?
Oh,
yeah.
That one had me thinking. That is the second to last question. So, but I do want to slow me down. I'd say I cannot touch on it just now in the sense that my identity also shifted or evolved from my earliest value of action, whereas not what you say is how does this add up? What are you? How does this show that it's relevant? You know, so the research started to be driven by the question that is bothering you. Yes. I'm not talking now as a PhD person, you know, as a teacher, and I needed to say if I haven't. One of the unique things about it with Patrick was that the director / principal of the school was a social worker, Nesta Patrick. And she was very, very strategic and strong. No one, the ministry didn't dare send someone to that school, even where I was recruited. I was at Piccadilly, and the principal at the time, Miss, what's her name, was she created the Teachers Credit Union. I can't remember her name right now. She'll forgive me. Anyway, she told me that there's this lady who was, she told me that there's this lady who would like to observe my teaching. That was, I had challenged Piccadilly that I was teaching standard 3 and I was only seeing the bright kids and the dull kids, something going on in infant department. And the principal, why is her name eluding me? Decided to send me down in front. I was so angry. And I tell people that was one of the best teaching days of my life when I embraced it. And I was just like the lead there for like about a term when she said there's a lady who wants to come and see me. And I really wasn't into the lady or anybody. I was into my kids. And so she came. I didn't know who it was. She introduced her, but it really didn't matter to me. I zoned them out because I'm fully engaged with my pupils, and it really bothered me. You could take your notes and whatever. And but once or twice I said, well, wait, in my mind, I said, why are you still here? And like this, I thought it's like a month now. You know, and she'll come, and then she started coming like randomly on a Monday, in the morning or in the evening for an hour or two. And next thing, Miss told me she would like me to come to her school to visit her school. And I visited. It was a ward at the time of St. Anne's Hospital. So scary. And then you had a wake-up call. You realize we did have kids in here. Kids in here. Anyway, so that shaped the notion when she would say, well, if this is what you want to do, I'm not saying you can't do it, but fill a case for it. What does the research say? And I say, well, and then, no, I don't want to hear what so-and-so say from Scandinavia. I want it to them, how is it working out here? And that pushed me in many, many times. So I would say that my initial identity was about problem solving as it impacted my own pedagogy, my own understanding of what was going on. I think I then kind of shifted to becoming, I started becoming aware of people, like when I did my PhD, or even with my master, but I started becoming aware of the marginalized. So I had when I was small, I got in a lot of trouble. Um, um, I got in trouble. I went to Press San Fernando, and I was, I just praise God that even then it was collaboration because my best friends was about 5 persons from Convent, from Naparima girls, and we'd always meet on the promenade. And so so I started seeing things differently. So when I was looking at effective education, I was looking at it from the perspective that it's not about, or even creating positive classroom environments, it's not about determining this behavior is inappropriate and we punish you. It's about creating the kind of look out for each other kind of environment where students are committed to other students and teachers are committed to other teachers' classes and things like that. So, so that was what made me start looking at effective education curriculum. And then when I went to do my PhD, I was actually looking to the fact that at that time I was of the view that the women, there were so many women in schools, yet the men are the administrators. The women, when I think about my life, from my infant school teacher, right through it, I remember individual teachers and some men too, but primarily women. And you don't hear about them. So I end up doing feminist research and I end up doing work in which I interview people like the same Lester Patrick and others. And the idea was what makes them different. But it was to give them voice, or what I thought at the time in my own unidentified patriarchy feeling. I wanted, but let us say I wanted to celebrate them. And then, then I started becoming, my research identity shifted from the given voice kind of marginalized to actually being an advocate. I wanted to not just share their story, but actually advocate. So I would look at how do I get action, because it's one thing to say this story, but then what? Then what? And then I think I shifted to being a bridge builder. Where I wanted to connect the various, because one of the things up to now that bothered me, even when I was in student support services, is that you have all these power brokers and all these little sections, even in that last book we did, where we look at, I tried to create a concept of multiple literacies. The idea that literacy not just being about reading and writing, but you have a school where you have a math teacher and you have a social studies and a Spanish teacher, but they're not even seeing the commonalities that they share with each other. All right. And then you have the literacy specialist and you have the dyslexia specialist or the special educator, and their key components of things they are doing in common, even if they shift their language. But they're not collaborating, they're not seeing, hey, and right, and then you have this way we feel threatened whenever there's this culture of, once you start to give too much information, you feel you're devaluing yourself, which is rubbish. You usually, when you give more information, you free yourself to go into different things and you master the information that at first you know it, but when you have to talk and present and debate it is when you really become the master. So I think I started to become a build bridger, connecting those dots. And I think the second to last thing which I jotted down just before you came was I started not just wanting to build a bridge between various units, but to build researchers where I started to see the mission of the research community. We go all the way back to Mr. Akal, to when I started to see the research, to share research and to build researchers, to build a community of people who could ask questions and look for possibilities of meaning and understanding. It's, I don't want to say power, but it is revolutionary. And we want to build researchers who are not into the self, because it's one of the problems we have, you know.
Yes.
People get so much into the self. There's a kind of arrogance when people, but it's not just limited to doctoral students. There are people who I could tell you from the, well, you go to college together and then they do a certificate and so, and then they reach heaven. When they do an MPhil, well, I am master's, well, when they reach an MPhil, so, and you say, what's wrong with these people? They forget, you know, they forget.
We live in a society.
Yeah, we're in an elitist society. And we, even while we try to do better for people, until we are able to examine ourselves and unpack the very story within ourselves. So, actually, that isn't here, but one of the things that I got interested in just before I left SUNY was self-study of teaching and self-study between, like, I did some work in autoethnography. I remember I did one controversial paper, but nobody take more now. I did this paper when the well-known Trinidad the well-known Trinidad anthropologist, Indo-Trinidadian, his name skips me right now, who no, this is a gentleman. But anyway, so he was talking, he always arguing about race. And I decided to join in the argument by claiming a double identity. Of course, I don't really have much double identity, but my great-grandfather, I was told, was Douglas. So I made the case that as far as I have the right to identify any part of my connection, I may have, if I were to genetically break it down, I may have about 35% in what we call indigenous Carib, or my brother always telling me stop using the word Carib, but indigenous. And I have European and I have African. And but who say anybody could tell me I know that I have
well, that's the thing now, isn't it?
Right. So I pushed the narrative, and he started communicating with me, which I wanted. But I wanted to he was communicating with me. Oh, I only did it like 3 times, I shouldn't say. But he was communicating more in the sense of who is this guy? And to see, I think he was trying to determine whether I was trying to be aggressive, whether I was trying to embarrass him.
Right. Yes.
But and when he recognized, no, I wanted a discourse, but he wasn't prepared to get into the discourse, which I can't be vexed with. Mahabe, Kumar Mahabe. Yeah. So you're with me? So it's one of those situations where I would have liked us to be able to explore it, but then I was up there, and when you realize, oh, you saw me up there, you know. But up to recently, I got something from him. But the idea being that we need, as researchers, to also look within ourselves, whether it's in terms of our pedagogy, to examine what about our teaching is working or not working, or to examine our identity itself. And you don't have to be right or wrong. It's the journey itself, what is important. And then, as I said, the last point is where I'm really more into building community of researchers to value each other, and for us to really care about to care about inquiry. It's not like when I first got into research at the advanced level, because I was in the leadership program, I would have started to do mixed methodology and quantitative work. But then I stepped away, and I went into qualitative work. And Lance and I initially had lots of argument about it, because he has changed so much. But at that time it was like, what kind of stuff work you starting to do now? But I was seeing it in a different world together. I was seeing this as, wait, it's not about the numbers for the policymakers. I don't give a shit. If you want to make an impact on the ground, let me recognize the individuals in the story. You know?
Yeah, really, really important. Transition, development, evolution there over time in terms of your identity. You shared with us before some of the influences that you have had on your journey in becoming a researcher, and that collaboration, for example, connecting with a community of learners would have facilitated your development. You shared as well being impacted by seeing really dynamic leaders, some of them female, over time, most of them female. You mentioned as well feeling that sense of being radicalized and being interested in the perspective of the marginalized in society and wanting to act and to seek change. So those are some of those influences that facilitated or fueled your development as a researcher. Can you share any factors that you felt hindered your journey?
I would say, as a researcher, I think the overburdened teaching university, which also exists in Caribbean, is ridiculous. And then you have a culture where, as those who become successful, they who become successful start to become minimalists. And also, one could argue that because of this heavy burden of work, and maybe the culture itself, there is few, of course, I have to be careful here, but there seem to be a paucity. Maybe it's just self-care, but there seem to be, instead of saying, well, I'm really good in this writing thing, or not really good in qualitative research, or not really good in understanding correlational work, then acknowledge it. Don't take responsibility. Up to this day, if a person sent me I just did a review for and somebody sent me a review, and I realized this have a heavy sense. I don't really make too much sense of this section here. Yeah. I tell at a glance, I don't have a problem. I don't want to pretend to anyone, and yet we have this subculture. I don't know if it's colonial or if it's just basic selfishness, where we want to be on the stage, yet we want to be minimalist, and we like. I don't think that we build researchers by breaking their spirit. I think we have power, and there's a lot of power and rubbish that goes on. And I have seen that. I have been blessed in that I have been able to navigate these things, but it was always around me, even at SUNY. It was always around me. I did work with some of my regional universities here. I did sabbatical at UTT, at UE, and it reeks. Wow. Well, I want, but all good knowledge also, because remember the people, there were people I forgot to say, people who inspired me here at what would have been Iwa Taylor, and Carol Keller. These are people, I was never a UE student. And these are people who embraced me, worked with me, built me, with me. And so let us be clear that I'm not attacking individuals necessarily, but I'm saying that there's a subculture where the ethic of caring, the value of the other, it's like up in the air, and we just want to see what we could get from them, and with the same breath, if necessary, we'll backstab them. And no one, and you see, the thing is, when you become aware of it, you're powerless anyway. And by the time you escape that, you are so busy in your accomplishments that you may have forgotten to say, wait, am I becoming like these?
So I just fit in.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dennis. I think we've had quite a remarkable conversation, and I'd like to guide us to close by asking you to share any words of advice or wisdom you can with our early career researcher community on building their own researcher identity, on navigating the academy, about associating themselves within a community that will fuel their development. Any words that you'd like to share with us?
I would come back to I would say that integrity is key. And integrity is something that goes with you long after you graduate, long after you retire. And it will still be questioned. This is one of the things about life, because until somebody take time to know who you are, they will always be feeling they know who you are. And one of the things that discouraged me when I was getting seriously into my psychology career path is when I said, wait. And that's one of the things that shifted me to special ed. I forgot to say that you started to realize that you are becoming this job that you always liked doing. And then you say, but really, am I really empowering people? Or am I putting them in boxes? Am I working for the system to actually help them marginalize people? Because while we say we want to do this particular assessment at times to help the child, it's not always as easy as that. So I would say integrity, to recognize that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to agree with everybody. You don't even always have to be agreeable. But know yourself and value other people, so that if you decide you're going to work like and this might change, but you decide, you look at your if possible, you look at your colleagues, you determine what are the common interests you may have and what are your projections. Many of us, we hear, but if you could think about where you think your research interest might be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, and to see within that group how you could start building alliances and to build each other. That to me is my biggest thing. Maintain integrity. Seek to work collaboratively. But the objective is not to build you, it's to build each other. So you do a project, and in each project, if you're working with 2 other persons, then if it's a 3 or 4 or 5, you make sure when you draft your work that there is enough for 5 people, yes, which each of you will have with one lead, and you have a clear policy whether you do it on alphabetical order or wherever, but you have a clear system where any research you sink your teeth in, it should give the members of your group each an opportunity to shift their lens or to shift whatever. So I would say those 3 things, which I can't remember right now.
Integrity, collaborate, and build each other.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, fantastic.
There's something that struck me. I remember one of the questions that didn't come up, which was which people would I say is one of my favorites.
Yes.
And that is funny, because one of the challenges, I wanted to do this course. I wanted to get a course on diversity. I was at a particularly homogeneous community, and I wanted to bring up conversations with it. We were like 15 minutes from the Mohawk Reservation, and we had a number of students coming in from Canada, I was right about 45 minutes from the border, and we had another group of people coming from New York City, and I was trying to convince the system that introduction to diversity issues in education should be something that should appeal to all students. And there was a lot of resistance. And when I finally got the proposal to say, maybe if you were to come up particular online or hybrid. And then I went to my department chair at the time, and she said, no. I was shocked that she said no, because she didn't believe in online learning at the time. And she don't believe in it. And why should we be catering for other people. And this is someone who was not Caucasian. I'll explain more details at the end, but I'm not really, and well then I challenged her in a heads of department meeting, and the chair said, well, yes, we come back to Mrs. Patrick. Well, perhaps you will need to do some action-based research to justify it. And I decided I will just do just that. And I contacted June Petro, and I asked her, she was also struggling with this notion of online work. And I said, let us do a paper exploring the experience, the initial experiences of early professors in, and she agreed. And that forced my institution to change because I think it is one of the most researched and utilized articles nationally, that is, internationally. And it forced the campus. Before COVID, we were offering more online courses. And even though that was kind of stopped talking to me. But I was okay because I didn't personalize it, which is what my dean had suggested, and which came right back to Mrs. Patrick, that you don't have to get into a fight. You consider carefully what the question is, and you go there. If the answers don't support you, accept. If it supports you, celebrate it. So yeah, and that, as silly as it is, it was not even. It was on University of Georgia. They have a that particular system, and every now and then they would send me and say, "Well, you have made, I think it's maybe 1,000 or more citation." So it, and yet it was not one of my best papers. But what happened is that it was the most guttural that, hey, we are drowning. We want to do this thing, but these are my doubts. I'm getting resistance, and I myself don't know what to do. So we're going to go out there and find out what the answers are.
Fantastic, and it probably in itself sums up the power of finding out. So,
Yeah.
as you said, problem solving was one of your identities, being that problem solver and finding the thing that will work. So, I think with that, Dennis, I have to thank you. So, thanks again. Great.